Nina Ignaczak. I am the founder and executive editor of Planet Detroit. We are a nonprofit newsroom based in Metro Detroit. We focus on public health and environmental issues that affect people who live in the city and in the region. I am so excited today to have some really interesting experts here to talk about surviving a Metro Detroit summer in the climate change era. Things are a little bit different than what they used to be. And so I'm thrilled to be joined today by and two meteorologists we have with us today, not just one. Andrew Arnold, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service Detroit, and Alec Kownacki, who is a meteorologist with the Michigan Department of Environment and Great Lakes. We also have Abazeed, the director of the Dearborn Department of Health, and Erin, Stanley, the Director of Climate Equity for Eastside Community Network. And so we're just going to get right into it. I know that we're in, I think, the third day of an extended heat wave, and it's only June. Yesterday we had, I experienced personally some high intensity rainstorms, thunderstorms late in the day across the region. We have an air quality advisory for ozone today, and we've had a few air quality advisories over the past few days. And I think, for me, and I think for a lot of our readers, these events seem to feel like they're becoming more common. We've had heat waves. But I think, some of the things that we've been experiencing, especially in the last few years, just feel a little bit different. And I think, we all know that climate change is here and that is what we're dealing with. So we wanted to bring some of these experts together here as we officially begin the summer season to help us understand what's happening and particularly what's happening in Southeast Michigan and how we can best prepare. So thank you to all of our guests, and we will be having audience questions as well. So if you want to post those in the chat, we'll be able to see those as we talk, and we'll have a section where we will address those questions towards the end. But let's begin with Ali Abazeed. Can you tell us a little bit about, from a health perspective, how these intense weather events have been impacting Metro Detroit residents, and particularly those in Dearborn, where you are serving?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina, and thank you all for hosting this really important conversation. It's only June 20th, as you alluded to, Nina, and my body is telling me that it's been August, September. I've been ready for football to start again. I'm a huge Michigan football fan, and so I'm ready for us to, repeat as national champions. But it truly feels like my body is prepared for the end of August, and it's largely because I didn't feel a winter this summer. I moved back to the area. Dearborn is my hometown from Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. And I'm used to the weather getting really hot in February in the DC area, not in the Detroit area. And so when we talk about climate change and environmental health and human health, those are not necessarily intuitive connections that people are making constantly. We have data from last year showing that we had the Metro Detroit area experienced 23 days of unhealthy air quality. It increased hospital admissions for respiratory issues, for cardiac issues. We had our first ever statewide alert for PM 2.5, which is an especially devastating form of particulate pollution that wreaks havoc on the respiratory system and the rest of the human body. But beyond that, I penned a piece last fall talking a little bit about how extreme weather sort of decays the fabric of society and the ways that it increases insecurity and vulnerability for communities. One good example is that community bonds, we're sort of in the midst of an ever-growing epidemic of social isolation, and extreme weather is only exacerbating that. When we talk about neighborhood squares, when we talk about community connections, the neighborhood square used to be the place where people met flesh to flesh. Those connections, in addition to so many other things that are happening across society, are increasing the distance between us and other humans. And so that increases vulnerability, that increases isolation, that increases the ways in which social and political tensions are increasing. One of the most one of the most fascinating bits of research that we have into climate change and human health actually focuses much more on upheaval, political upheaval that's due to extreme weather that's leading to these significant changes in the fabric of society. We have data showing that the more extreme weather there is, the more extremism exists in society, and the more political rhetoric leads to some of these events that we've seen across the country over the last couple of years. So it's really hard to quantify the ways in which these disasters are impacting our health, because they are affecting our psychosocial health in ways that we're just beginning to explore.
And so it is hard to quantify, but we were able to, in some of our reporting, look at excess deaths last year during these wildfire smoke events that we experienced. And there was data showing that, maybe 24 Detroit residents may have died directly as a result of Canadian wildfire smoke, about 100 people across the state. And that's just looking at comparatively, how much mortality occurred during that period versus other periods where we didn't have the wildfire smoke. Who are the people being most affected by this?
Well, that's exactly right. Wildfire smoke, it's traveling across long distances. It's exposing people both near and far from the fire to respiratory irritants. It's burning vegetation. It's burning trees. It's emitting smoke that impacts lung and heart health. I think when we talk about who it's affecting, it's also important to recognize that the way that we register extreme weather, we don't typically think of extreme heat the same way that we do a tornado or a flood or a hurricane. But in fact, more extreme heat kills more people in the United States every year than any other type of extreme weather event combined. And so I think it's the way that we register those extreme weather events. We had a tragic death or a couple deaths a couple weeks ago in the Livonia area due to a tornado. Extreme heat is killing more people than any of those weather events combined. But similar to so many other things across society, it's people closest to the pain that are bearing the brunt of environmental injustice and the climate catastrophe. It's folks in communities that are underserved. It's folks in communities that have been forgotten by different communities and under-resourced communities. It's communities like ours in Dearborn in the South End that are in closer proximity to factory stacks and corporate polluters. It's immigrants, it's refugees, it's Black people, it's brown people. It's folks that have been, by design of policy, placed in certain communities that are more prone to environmental injustice.
And so, Ali, you mentioned the first ever PM 2.5 air quality. My next question is for Alec at Eagle. Alec, can you explain to us what that means, why we kind of have two different sort of air quality alerts now, one for ozone, which we're sort of all familiar with that. We've heard of ozone action days, but we have this new one now related to particulate matter. What's driving that, and how is Eagle assessing what kind of air quality day we have?
Yeah, so we have monitors across the state that monitor both ozone and PM 2.5. So in the past, when ozone, or before last year, PM 2.5 reached the USG, which is the unhealthy for sensitive groups range on the AQI chart, which is more so just the orange color that you see. That is the threshold that we use to issue, in the past, Air Quality Action Day, and then now this year, an Air Quality Advisory. So as we saw also last year, and as you just alluded to, we've seen ozone typically every summer. On days like today, as you mentioned, there's an air quality advisory in effect right now. I just continued it through tomorrow for the Southeast Michigan area. So last year with the wildfire smoke, we've been forecasting PM 2.5 specifically since I believe the 2007 to 2008 year range. That's when we added that into our forecast kind of regime. And ever since then, up until last year, we never had to issue any kind of alert for PM 2.5. Obviously, last year kind of changed the game, and that's kind of why after the ozone / PM 2.5 fire season, which is more so in the summertime, we sat back and realized that we need to make some changes to our air quality action day type messaging and issuance. So that's why we made the change to air quality advisory and air quality alert. And those ozone and PM 2.5 can be both an advisory or an alert.
Okay.
So we just more so specify this is an air quality advisory for ozone or air quality advisory for PM 2.5. And in some cases, like we saw last year, it can be air quality advisory for both ozone and PM 2.5. So for each, we kind of differentiate for each kind of health messaging recommendations, some positive activities that can kind of help the overall air quality. So those are the changes that we kind of made based on last year.
Got it. And so what should people know? Like, what is the difference between, first of all, what's the difference between an alert and advisory?
Okay. Yeah. So basically, advisory is where it kicks off where air pollutants become hazardous for those with asthma, respiratory illnesses. So that kind of takes the place of the unhealthy for sensitive groups range. That's the threshold for issuing an advisory, or the orange kind of color on the AQI chart. And then that's for USG only. Then the alert is for when it gets to the red, purple, or maroon, which is the unhealthy, very unhealthy, or hazardous. And so we kind of made the difference, the cutoff for unhealthy and, or we made the cutoff be USG and healthy because unhealthy or worse air brings in the general public. It brings in people who are healthy, who don't necessarily have asthma. So we wanted to heighten the alert level because it brings in such a broad general public while not negating those with asthma. That's just why we kept the advisory.
Okay, got it. And then what are some of the differences, why you differentiate between the ozone and the particulate matter 2.5? What are some of the differences in terms of the messaging and what people need to know about those particular issues related to their health?
Yeah, so last year, over the winter, we talked with the Michigan Health Department just for more feedback and more information from them for more specific recommendations for ozone and PM 2.5. It was more so PM 2.5 related because ozone, we kind of have that messaging down pat because we've been issuing those kind of alerts for years. So it's trying to drive less, do not fill up your gas tank, don't mow your lawn, any kind of emission that emits pollutants into the air because ozone is a photochemical reaction that occurs in the atmosphere. Chemicals and pollutants that interact with sunlight and heat to create ozone. Whereas for PM 2.5, there's not too much you can do because, as Ali mentioned before, it's coming across country, across international borders. So there's not too much that we can do to help the air. It's more so what you can do to protect yourself, which is last year we recommended bringing back your N95 masks. Those helped. We got that information from the health department. If you're able, run your air conditioning system to kind of help filter the air. There's also some other filtration systems that the health department was also kicking out. So we kind of piggybacked a lot with the health department last year, and that's why we wanted to talk with them this year to include it in our messaging if we need to issue an alert for PM 2.5 again.
Okay, and just before I move on from this, last question. So far, we've had several air quality advisories this year. Have they all been ozone so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so no PM 2.5 yet.
Not yet. Knock on wood. Basically, comparing. I was just looking before the webinar, looking at the wildfire kind of situation up in Canada. This time last year, you would see wildfires all across Canada, and that's what was causing all the PM 2.5 becoming into Michigan. This year, right now, today, it's about half of the wildfires up in Canada right now. So we're not seeing too much smoke up in the upper atmosphere, or at least in the lower atmosphere. So yeah, what you just mentioned, all the alerts or advisories this year have been for ozone.
Got it. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to Erin Stanley with Eastside Community Network. Erin, you work with communities directly in some of Detroit's neighborhoods on climate resiliency. What are you seeing in terms of the people that you're working with, and how are you able to, help them deal with some of these issues?
Yeah. So first I want to uplift what Ali mentioned about, it's environmental justice communities that are already overburdened by other social and environmental injustice issues that climate change is impacting the most. So climate change isn't happening on some sort of like neutral landscape. And so that means like our solutions and our responses need to also reflect that inequity. And, you know, and just that it's like compounded issues. So it's not just flooding in 2021, it was flooding plus a pandemic that was also overburdening Detroit households. It's not just particulate matter from the wildfires, it's on top of communities that are already overburdened. We're next to a factory that is asking for more particulate matter in a permit to Eagle. So it's already overburdened by particulate matter here. And then, you know, then we have to worry about wildfires on top of that. And it's a community that's, you know, our housing stock in this community, a lot of it doesn't have air conditioning. We have a home repair crisis, people that need desperately new windows, roofs, things like that, our homes should be the first line of defense. In a lot of communities they are, but in our community, they're not. They're actually adding to our vulnerability and our risk. So a couple things that we're highlighting that I just wanted to put in, even like today, or even this week rather, we're seeing all three of these things. We're seeing these severe storms and this fear of flooding. In 2021, it's estimated that up to 55% of Detroit homes were impacted by this flooding. And, you know, obviously it impacted communities outside of Detroit, like in Grosse Pointe. I like to say that with climate change, we might be in the same storm, but not the same boat. Our ability to respond isn't the same. A lot of that's already impacted, you know, already decided based on these other social factors. And then that's obviously with the heat this week, we've also had air quality alerts, you know, the ozone alerts. And it is leading. I appreciate you, Nina, for uplifting that, you know, and doing that research to look at the impact of the wildfires last year. And this was from research, you know, before we started talking about wildfires, still found that over 700 people are dying prematurely in Detroit from air quality. And the American Lung Association gave Wayne County an F and said that we're, I think, 13th worst in the country for air quality in 2024. So these are just things we need to kind of think about, these compounding factors. And then the heat, obviously, I really appreciate Ali for uplifting the fact that heat isn't talked about enough. FEMA doesn't even register heat as a disaster, which means people can't get support if they have, you know, higher DTE bills because they run their air conditioners or window units and things like that. So we really need FEMA and the federal government to step up and recognize the impact that heat has. And then you also have the fear of power outages, which Michigan already ranks 4th highest in the country. You know, so there's the, you know, fact that you might, you know, have the things that you're using to help you deal with the heat could go out at any minute, you know, and I know that there's already been power outages across the region this week.
Yeah, there has. We experienced a brief one here already. Okay, thank you for that context, Erin, and we'll get more into what you're actually doing to help address these multiple layered issues. But first, I wanted to go to Andrew, our meteorologist with the National Weather Service. So what can we expect this year, Andrew? I know we've had some heat already. We're having some heat. I just heard the wildfire smoke might not be quite as bad as it was last year. What are you predicting for this summer?
Yeah, so for this summer, it's going to be, as I've looked over the last several outlooks that we've had the last several years, it's fairly similar here. But to provide a baseline for where these normals or these averages come from, our typical average for Detroit for temperatures is in your upper 70s to low 80s. So that's whenever I talk about normals for summer temperatures, that's what I'm talking about for averages there. And in terms of precipitation, it's generally 3¼ to 3½ for each month, so June, July, and August. And so that's about 10 inches, around 10 inches average that Detroit gets over the course of a summer. So this year's summer outlook is leaning a little more towards above normal temperatures, and kind of there's not really a strong lean on precipitation. So we're in the equal chances for this year's summer. So, you know, a lot of these outlooks are based off of kind of larger global patterns like El Nino and La Nina. So when we talk about these summer outlooks or seasonal outlooks, it's usually based a lot on that. So with this one, we're kind of coming out of an El Nino through the winter, and we're kind of transitioning into La Nina. So with those, it affects more of the winter time, where there's not really a strong indication of whether you're in a La Nina or El Nino. It doesn't affect us too much in terms of the pattern as it does in the summer, as it does to winter. But one thing that we have been seeing, and again, as we've talked about a little bit about climate change already, a lot of these outlooks already have sort of a built-in climatological change that we've seen. So just to put some numbers on it, in the past 30 years, we've had an increase of about 1.5 inches rainfall per decade in those 3 years. And in terms of temperatures, we've seen an increase of 0.8 Fahrenheit increase per decade. So within these outlooks, they're already warming and getting more wetter to begin with. That's sort of built into these outlooks as well. So, but yeah, whenever you see above normal temperatures too, we're still talking about longer term averages. So it can't really pick out one day of heavy rainfall within there.
Right.
But with this, we can also see some cooler patterns that develop. But again, we're leaning more towards the above normal temperatures, and sort of that there's no real strong lean either way for precipitation this year.
So we're definitely more heat, and we're sort of just expecting precipitation and then kind of flooding to be normal. But I know we asked you to go into a little bit more depth for us to look at flooding in particular, and I know that Erin mentioned people are just the thought of it happening is just a major stressor for people. So what are your predictions saying in terms of what we saw back in 2021 and where we are now?
Yeah, so you can sort of see comparatively and from this year, as there's already an indication that, as again, we're warm, we're pretty warm here in early June already, when you would really expect that in July and August. It was a very similar outlook in 2021, and we sort of had a lean towards above normal, and there's actually a little bit of swath towards a slight lean towards above normal precipitation in 2021. But yeah, with the June flood events that occurred with there, it really for that it lines up with sort of shorter scale features or shorter term features that sort of just line up where you get really high moisture that's in the area, or you get a stalled frontal boundary that kind of hangs out over central lower Michigan, and that becomes a focus for kind of training thunderstorms. If there's waves of low pressure that move along this front, you can get repeated rounds. And if you've got really high moisture content in the air, like you can sort of feel it out there right now with like 70 dew points. When you walk out, you can sort of feel the moisture in the air. When you've got those setups in these shorter term events, that's where you really get those heavy rain events, and they may not show. It's hard to pick those out within the larger scale seasonal outlooks. Those will happen within
they're going to happen. Yeah,
3 to 4 days, you can sort of start picking out, and a lot of times it can be within a day or two.
And so I know that National Weather Service is taking a bit of a new approach in terms of alerting to Detroit communities to these risks of urban flooding. Can you talk a little bit about what you're planning to do?
Correct. Yeah. So because we're seeing these more frequently, these heavy rain events a lot more frequently, and this is going between 2014, where there was another heavy rain event that impacted Detroit Metro, and then we've had several here in the last couple of years. With June 2021, and there's another event in July of 2021, and 2023 we had one in August. So they're happening more frequently. So one of the things that we're trying to do to sort of highlight this, and it's really to help resiliency amongst the urban populations and vulnerable communities to these high impact rainfall events, is we'll issue flood watches probably a little more liberally when we think we at least have high enough confidence that a heavy rain event could occur within the Detroit metro area. So you may see flood watches that go out for Macomb County, Oakland County, and Wayne County a little bit more frequently. If we think that there's a good chance for 2 inches or more of rainfall to fall within 3 hours, or 4 inches to fall within 8 hours. So as you know, with heavy rain events, if you get a lot of rainfall in a short period of time, it can provide a much greater impact that way. So what we're going to try and do, if we have enough confidence that a heavy rainfall event is possible within the Detroit area, we might issue a flood watch that's more targeted towards the Detroit metro area and the counties that cover it.
Got it. Okay. Well, since we're on the topic of flooding, Ali and then Erin, you know, now we're kind of in the aftermath after 2021, what are some of the things that we are still seeing in terms of lasting impacts? Because these big floods in our urban areas, when they happen, they don't kind of just happen and go away. There's a lot of lingering impacts that people are seeing in terms of their homes, their health, their finances. What are some of the things that you're seeing in your communities?
You know, one of the reasons why I believe so strongly in a public health approach isn't because it's a discipline or a department or a field of study. It's really a lens through which one can look at the world. And you know, when Dearborn established the public health department in 2022, we became just the second city in the state to have a formal health authority. But we do things differently. We apply a health lens to everything that we do as a city. So that means economic development, police, fire, DPW, water and sewage, parks and recreation. Everyone is thinking with a health lens. And I think one of the things that happens when we have these conversations and we have brilliant experts like we do on this call is there's a need to sort of demystify, because folks may not understand or be able to quantify how a stormwater infrastructure can tolerate 3 inches of rainwater a day before that flooding ends up in their basements. But guess what? They do know what sewage water looks like in their basements.
Yes.
People may not be able to recognize, you know, the quantity of how many deaths are happening as a result of extreme weather events. But what is salient to them is that they feel some type of psychological toll when it rains outside. They feel some type of psychological toll when they get these alerts on their phone saying, you know, stay inside, heat stroke, heat advisory. And so much of what we do in Dearborn is really trying to demystify so much of this lingo and language. In Dearborn, 2/3 of our homes were affected by flooding, some form of flooding in 2021. And anecdotally, speaking to residents, we have several residents, primarily our elderly residents, who talk to me about not going in their basements anymore without putting on an N95, who talk to me about not being able to enjoy the rain like they did back in the day. Because anytime it sprinkles outside, they're checking their basements for flooding. And so, you know, these are things that are felt by our community. You know, the city of Dearborn is doing a lot of work on improving that infrastructure. The city of Dearborn also recognizes that we can't solve this on our own. We are the last community that's downriver where the water sort of deposits. And so we need support and collaboration from upstream communities. And so this is a regional issue at best. Really, it's a national and then international issue. But here in Southeast Michigan, it's a regional issue. We need upstream communities to collaborate, to be more in tune with one another, because we're not going to solve this stuff on our own.
Mm-hmm. Erin, what are you seeing in on Detroit's East Side in terms of the lingering impacts of the floods from 2021?
Yeah, I mean, Ali did a great job summarizing it. I think like the anecdotally too, hearing a lot of people that just won't go into their basements. They don't even want to look, kind of avoiding their basements. People that are still recovering, like don't have hot water heaters, still trying to find funding for those kinds of things, or cleaning their basements. We've also heard reports, you know, stories of black mold, people having to move or finding black mold when they move into another place. So there's also this like indoor air quality concern. And then, you know, the other thing is the trauma piece. Like, I think just really like every time, like Ali was saying, every time it rains, like having kind of an emotional reaction, being like not liking summer anymore, you know, because people are like so scared. And yeah, so I think that's something. We just had an All About Water event a couple weeks ago, and we brought in some healers to like open us up. You know, just like every time we talk about flooding, we try and make sure we're doing some healing and some grounding and just like recognizing that this is hard stuff to talk about. But the other thing is like wanting to know the solutions, like wanting to know what's happening. And that's part of why we had that event, was to have Great Lakes Water Authority and Detroit Water and Sewage Department come in and actually tell us what's happening. Like, what are they actually doing? Because I think what this really also revealed was a disconnect of information. So I appreciate Ali for like trying to demystify it, trying to like really make sure you're doing outreach to communities and sharing what can be done, you know, and what's being done, rather than just doing it and then going to the community and saying, hey, what do you think? We're already doing this plan, you know? So yeah, so really trying to make sure that we're building those bridges between the utilities and some of the solutions as well as the people.
Did you feel that there are things being done? How optimistic are you about the future, I guess? Not that this is going to go away.
Yeah,
as
that's a hard question.
We're addressing it.
Yeah. I think what I'm least optimistic about is the regional cooperation, but I think that's the most important. Like Ali was saying, I think like the east side too gets a lot of stormwater flowing through. We're a lower topography than a lot of these communities. And so we need more pumps to actually get the water out to the wastewater treatment plant. And we're getting a lot of water from Macomb and Oakland County and need them to pull their weight more and like hold on to some of that water in high, precipitation events. So that's like a big advocacy thing that I think people talk about, but I'm not sure, where that's actually going. But I think, I am somewhat optimistic. I appreciated, them coming out to the east side and like sharing some of their plans. DWSD is actually starting a east side resiliency study. So I'm a little optimistic about that and specifically hopeful that they do a lot of engagement. And we offered to help them host events and things like that. So they're just in the beginning planning stages, but I'm glad they're finally like working on an east side specific kind of resiliency plan. And then we're also working with Wayne State to write the first Detroit River watershed management plan. Right. And we have a lot of different stakeholders around, the table, Army Corps of Engineers, DWSD, and others. And also we have a resident writing team. So we have actual residents that are impacted that are helping write this plan that will hopefully be able to get implemented. So I'm optimistic about that.
Great. All right. So my next question is for Alec. Andrew talked about the conditions this year a little bit, but I think you're going to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing with the Canadian wildfire smoke and the potential that we might have some particulate matter issues this year.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, looking at the wildfire map for Canada, all the provinces, there's not too many compared to last year. Obviously, last year when you if you would go on the website and click on today, June 2023, you would see just lit up with fires all over the place. This year, not the case. Although we have had some wildfire smoke on the surface. I believe it was earlier in May. Minnesota and Wisconsin, they had air quality alerts for PM 2.5. In the Western Upper Peninsula, they got hit by it, but nothing to warrant an advisory or alert in that area. But obviously, we're watching it. And we have been talking we have colleagues in Wisconsin, Minnesota, basically the Midwest. We have a colleague over in Ontario. She's been giving us some information from them. We started looking at wildfire potential back in January, just paying attention to drought formations up in the Alberta, Saskatchewan, central kind of Canada provinces, as well as over in Minnesota, because I believe it was 2021, the kind of the arrowhead, as they call it, of Minnesota had very strong drought concentrations and caused some wildfires in that area. So compared to last year, we are thankfully a lot less potential for wildfire smoke on the surface. But obviously, as we know, that can change. But we've been looking at drought conditions, weather concentrations, conditions up in Canada, just kind of pertain to those kind of conditions. So,
okay, so we're a little less worried. Sounds like is that fair to say?
Yep, and we talk weekly, sometimes daily, with our colleagues in the Midwest, with our colleague over Ontario, where she gives us information on the inside scoop for wildfire kind of concentrations in that area. And
we're seeing a bit less.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, that's a relief a bit. So we're going to turn a little bit now to solutions and back to Erin. I know, Erin, you and your organization are doing a lot of work to try to respond to these growing risks. What are some of the things that you're doing on the east side?
Yeah, so there's a few different things, and I'm mostly going to touch base on one. But we're doing a lot of power building and advocacy, like really trying to work with residents to try and advocate for policies that can help with some of like the actual system changes that we need. We're also doing a lot of capacity building with resident leaders and like pass through like granting for residents to implement their own projects around mobility and gardening and other things like that. And that's mostly through our sustainability fellowship. And then we're doing community science. We actually are partners with the National Weather Service as a co-op station and are tracking weather like temperature, rain, and snow on the east side, which wasn't really being done previously. And we've deployed 21 rain gauges to different resident leaders across the east side that are helping track like how much rain we're actually getting. and also deploying community air monitors as well. But what I really want to touch base on is resilience hubs, just because that's really relevant to the question that we're talking about today, which is how do we survive? And we really view the survival as a collective endeavor. It's not something that we're just all trying to do off on our own in our own houses. And so we really want to uplift the role of community spaces in that collective survival. And so at ECN, we have the Stoudemire Wellness Hub, which, does day-to-day programming, but also serves as a resilience hub during like not so great times. And so this is just a quick overview of like what a resilience hub is. Working on actually having resilient infrastructure, so solar plus storage. So if there is an outage, you can stay open, flood mitigation strategies, working to improve the indoor air quality. So we actually mean it when we say come in, it's safer, as well as like coordinating emergency services, and really having a shared communication protocol with the city, with the state, with, all, with FEMA if we need to, and really trying to make sure we're getting the right information out to residents. And then what's most important about a resilience hub is that it's also providing just everyday services, that it's a place people already feel at home at. It's not just like, a gym with chairs in it, but like a place that people aren't going to go in a crisis to a place they don't already feel comfortable. And we can go to the next slide. And this is what specifically we're working on. So I mentioned that we have the Stoudemire Wellness Hub here at ECN. We are offering heat relief days all week until 7:00 at night. So come on in. We have popsicles, movies, activities, pizza, things like that. But this is just a map showing what we're really trying to work on is creating an interconnected network of resilience hubs across the Eastside so that everyone has one within like 15 minutes of a walk, potentially. That's the end goal, is really that people can walk to one, because we know mobility and transportation can be a barrier, but also that maybe we have a shuttle service, that we're actually working through, and that all of these hubs are communicating and coordinating together, sharing resources. We know which, can provide food, which can provide the most physical space, things like that. And so this is just, I believe right now we have 12 hubs that are engaged in this effort, and we're really trying to work to build the capacity of all of these hub leaders to serve like, the resilience and emergency response side of things, because they're all already doing amazing work in their communities. So we're just trying to really focus on adding the kind of resilience and emergency response side.
So what's happening, like for example, at the Stoudemire Hub today during this heat wave? What can residents do and access?
Yeah. So we have classes. We have like 35 classes a week, I believe, at the Stoudemire. So people are free to jump in on any of those classes, ranging from like Zumba to sewing to martial arts, tech hub type classes, computer classes. So people can jump in on those. We also had we had a family of young children come in, and we have a new childcare hub. So we have toys and games for kids. And we also are showing movies. That's what I associate with like heat days, is like just wanting to go to the movies and sit in air conditioning. So we have, that going on as well. Or you can just also, if you want to work, if you need to like just have your own space, we can find that for you too.
Great. Okay. And Ali, what is the Dearborn Health Department concerned about this summer, and what are some of the things that you're doing in terms of outreach to help people plan ahead and stay safe?
So much of what we're doing all the time is really trying to stay ahead of any potential concerns, crises, catastrophes, God forbid. And so much of what Erin said just really resonates. The Department of Public Health it's the City of Dearborn Department of Public Health, but we try to practice what I preach all the time, which is how do we engage in more regional coordination? And so recognizing that Dearborn is the suburban city with the largest border with the city of Detroit, recognizing Dearborn's role historically in perpetuating grave, vile injustices as an institution, especially towards the residents of Detroit, we have a role to play in ameliorating many of those conditions, especially when it comes to environmental justice. And so much of what we do is really trying to redefine the social contract. And I'm consciously aware all the time that we have the power of our governmental letterhead behind us. And we're using that power on behalf of people closest to the pain. And so much of what we're doing is demystifying. So much of what we're doing is communicating. I was in the federal government during the pandemic, and I learned very quickly and rather intimately how we as a field in public health and how we as a body in government failed. We failed in our fundamental principle, which is to communicate to people. And the most brilliant people on earth worked where I worked at the NIH, but those people were not effective communicators, especially with a virus that was evolving rapidly, especially on a day-to-day basis. And so what we focus on in Dearborn is health communications. Health communications is not this, fun, sexy, gimmicky thing. It is all those things because we make it fun, but it's absolutely fundamental to it's an intervention in and of itself. And so we are really expert communicators on all types of weather events. We are trying to reach our community. Over 55% of our population speaks English as a second language. A third of our population is foreign born. And so, we are constantly trying to rework and rewire the ways in which government is reaching people rather than waiting on people reaching their government.
Got it. And so we have a lot of audience questions, which is really good to see. And I want to give the audience as much time as possible with to ask these questions of you. But before we just move on to that, what are some of the, and this question is for Andrew and Alec, but Erin and Ali, if you have anything to contribute, please jump in as well. What's the best way for people to stay aware of, whether it's safe for them to go outdoors during this time, or what about, what happens during an event that knocks out power? Like, what are some of the best ways to stay aware of hazards?
From the Weather Service side, I think we always try and teach and tell people to stay weather aware. Like, just check on the weather and what you're expecting for today or the next few days so you can prepare for it. So if one of the best spots you can go for the Weather Service is our website. It's just at weather.gov/Detroit or /DTX. Where you can find a lot of information that we push out that's free to the public. We have weather stories that sort of highlight the upcoming weather that's expected for the day, whether it's going to be hot, whether it's going to be humid, whether we're expecting thunderstorms. If we think there's potential for heavy rainfall, we may talk about it. So we push a lot of information out on our website as well as our social media. So it's important just for people to every day, it might be tedious every day to look, but it's important to know and prepare, for those events if we think that they're possible within the next few days. So, on days where there may not be any sort of hazards that are issued, like there may not be a flood watch. Today is a really good example of that, where you can go to our website and on the top, there's an expert forecast opinion where we actually sort of try and communicate why we're doing the forecast that we are, or why we have the conditions, possible for, say, heavy rain. So, in this particular pattern that we've been, where we've got heat, humidity, that's fuel for thunderstorms, where it may not be widespread, or it's hard to pinpoint a location for maybe heavy rainfall. Today's another good example where there's potential that there could be 1 to 2 inches of rainfall that falls somewhere, and if it hits in just the right spot, it might cause some problems. So we sort of highlight that in our discussions as well, for people to look at and be prepared for.
And so that's the DTX. Oh, good. Yep. And so we added that to the comments and on the social posts link to your website. Anybody else have anything they want to say about that?
I was going to say too, from an air quality standpoint, when we issue an advisory or alert, we go through and coordinate with the National Weather Service. So that air quality alert will show up on the website that Andrew just mentioned. You can see all the monitors and concentrations for ozone and PM 2.5 on EPA's airnow.gov website. It has all the monitors across the state. You can click on it, shows the concentrations, shows the previous 24-hour concentrations for those pollutants, along with an app that we use called EnviroFlash. You can sign up based on your zip code, and if we issue an advisory or alert for your zip code, it gets emailed, gets texted right to you. So that's going along with what Andrew said, staying weather aware. It's also kind of going along with saying being air quality aware as well. So.
Great. And I am throwing the EnviroFlash link into our comments as well.
Yeah, one more note to add on to that in terms of preparedness is we have no weather radios. So again, those are also battery backed as well. So if you were to lose power, you can still get life-saving information from a NOAA weather radio. So that's we really harp on people trying to have one of those, because it's still one of the quickest and most effective ways to get warnings in case there is a flash flood warning or a flood warning that's issued for your area, or there's severe thunderstorms or possibly tornadoes. If your power is out, those will still go off if you have battery backups for those. And again, they'll alert you. One of the quickest ways to get alerts.
Got it. Anybody else?
I was just going to add that the city of Detroit also has an emergency alert system. I think it's called Detroit 365.
Right.
And you can sign up for text alerts or phone calls. And that's not just about weather, but other things too that come up. And then, part of what we're trying to do is really trying to synthesize. And I know that Ali's probably doing this too. So finding out the local organizations that you trust and trying to establish a relationship, follow them on social media. Planet Detroit, I think, is a great resource as well. And then, I was also going to say the Just Air app.
Yes.
They have an air monitoring network across Wayne County that's in addition to the states like Eagle. Because for instance, we only have one Eagle monitor on the east side, but we have a bunch more that are on the Just Air app. So if you kind of want to look more specific to your area, if there's a closer monitor, I'd suggest that.
Got it. All right. And throwing those links in the chats. All right. I'm going to get into some of these audience questions. We've got a couple about air conditioning. I'm going to kind of combine them into two parts. But, the first question is very few people who live in the older housing stock in the city of, in Detroit, even in parts of Dearborn too, don't have air conditioning and have to get through the season without it. The first part of the question is, how do you survive? What's your best strategy for dealing with heat waves like the ones we're experiencing now if you don't have air conditioning? Anybody can grab that question.
I bet Ali can probably be more specific than me, but I have read that if you go into air conditioning for even an hour to 3 hours, that can help your body regulate for that, because the issue with heat waves, right, is that it's not cooling off at night,
Right.
So you're doing, it's just 24 hours plus of that. So even just coming to a cooling center, resilience hub, a grocery store, anywhere you can find air conditioning, even if it's temporarily, will help your body regulate. That's kind of at least what we try and promote. And the other thing is just we really need to advocate to FEMA to get heat as a natural disaster declaration, because that could open up resources to help people get air conditioning and also help people with their energy bills,
Right.
that will increase during that. And then, I just think we need more programs to give out window units. But that's
Window units, yeah.
I can just sort of double down on that. Air condition it's not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. And I was just having this conversation with students yesterday at the University of Michigan who live in older apartments in Ann Arbor that don't have air conditioner, which I think is just asinine. And something. Talk about accountability. There needs to be accountability for some of these management companies and the ways in which they're exploiting these students. But Erin hit it on the head. It's body regulation. It's humidity regulation. One of the things that doesn't get a lot of it gets short shrift, I should say, is also the ways in which air condition helps regulate noise. Noise pollution is an absolute menace on public health, and the body of literature is just growing, showing how noise is affecting our human health on a day-to-day basis. Air condition helps with that. And so at the moment, we don't have any sort of magical great solutions. The Inflation Reduction Act has some credits and subsidies that are helping. My understanding is the uptake is quite low at the moment, which I think speaks to the issue of communicating saliently about some of these government programs. That said, there's a wealth of resources on available cooling centers. My department offers that, Dearborn DPH, on social media, both in Dearborn, but also across Wayne County. And I'm sure, ECN and other organizations do the same.
Got it. And so the other part of that question, was, and you both touched on it a bit, what are we doing to increase the availability of air conditioning to vulnerable populations? What programs do exist? What more needs to be done, both in terms of, federal disaster relief, the IRA programs, other programs for window units, just to make sure that people have some way to get cool, even if for a little bit?
I'm familiar with some of the programs. You know, there's the energy efficiency home improvement credit, which offers up to a 30% tax credit if you're replacing your existing AC unit with a high efficiency AC unit. There's also the homes rebate program, which is quite honestly very nebulous, and I'm not too familiar. Other than that, eligible households are eligible for up to $8,000 in tax credits. But again, the Inflation Reduction Act, as great of an investment as it is in climate change, the largest in U.S. history, we also need to sort of interrogate that a little bit to see how much of those funds have gone to utility companies, have gone to the sort of companies and corporations that are actually causing a lot of the problems. I mean, you know, some of the the bill itself passed because some of the utility companies supported it at the very end, and so we should always ask those questions. But my understanding is that the uptake is quite low, but these rebates and credits do exist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Erin, anything to add there?
No, I mean, yeah, he said it well. The only thing I would add is the other thing I've been thinking about this week is needing to advocate to the utilities to also have shut-off prevention programs in summer, because I know we have those in winter based on, you know, the public health issue that heat is. And I think similar to what Ali was saying, we need to see cooling also as a public health need, like a necessity. That if people can't afford their bill, they should still be able to like run AC if they have it, or fans. Got it.
I have a specific question for Erin from Maria Martin Thomas. Thank you so much for submitting the question live. What kind of coordination is there between ECN's community resiliency hubs and City of Detroit's resources like the recreation centers? How are you working with the city?
That's a great question. Thank you. That's an ongoing thing that we are working on. So we have, the city is part of the Resilient Eastside initiative. Their community center at A.B. Ford Park is part of the Resilience Hub network. And so they've been at the table for a while, and that's mostly the Office of Sustainability. But through that connection, we've made relationships in the emergency management department. And we meet with the city monthly to kind of try and talk through some of these coordination issues and communication issues, and are hoping in July actually to be able to kind of present the need for resilience hubs and what they offer to both the city health department and emergency management, to try and kind of get them more on board, because we already have the Office of Sustainability on board, but we really need those other entities so that we're coordinating better. Part of one of our asks is that they share out the other resilience hubs in addition to their own. And so that's something that we're asking them to do, and also that they're sharing information with us directly so that we can get it out to all the hubs.
Got it. There's a question here about seniors in particular. You know, that's a particularly vulnerable population. A lot of seniors we know live in older housing without air conditioning, and may, you know, due to health conditions, be even, you know, more vulnerable. What can people do in their communities, in their neighborhoods, to make sure their seniors are safe during these heat waves?
A lot of the messaging that we have out in the weather service, just check on them.
Yeah.
See how they're doing. You know, do frequent check-ins with them to see if you know, they are being affected by the heat, and then, you know, from that point, you know, try and get them in a better spot, you know, where there is better cooling and out of the place that's potentially causing them harm.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see what else we have here. What can people do to make sure that their basements don't back up during heavy rains and when we have these floods? What should people be thinking about in terms of their own properties?
What we share is some of the same that everyone else shares. You know, be careful with what you're, you know, flushing down your toilet, and for those who have, and I know some cities offer some rebates for this, but sometimes taking preventative measures like snaking your sewage pumps in the basement or your sewage lines in the basement. I know my parents have been doing that for years after they had catastrophic flooding in 2014, and so they just do that preventatively every single year, snake their basement. But that's a cost. It costs upwards of $100, $150 to do so. But it's really some of the basic stuff. At the end of the day, if you're getting a quote once in a century weather or rain event, a lot of this is unfortunately out of our hands, but there is a lot of work happening at the city level. I can speak for Dearborn in terms of, we just completed a sewage study, and we're currently working on a sustainability plan and currently working on a built environment plan too, where all of those recommendations can go into a comprehensive strategy so that we can implement some of these findings, but it'll still depend, as always, on regional coordination as well.
The only thing I'll add is block clubs can get organized and take care of who's going to check the catch basins on the street. The city does those not as regularly as people, as they back up. And so, there is some sort of responsibility we need to take as a community to check them and clear out leaves and sticks and things. And then there are really low cost water leak detectors that we've been handing out that you can put right by your floor drain. It's, again, not a preventative, but it would tell you right away. It could ping to your phone. It could tell you if there's water coming in so that you can get down there as quick as possible. So things like that.
Not the ping that you want to get on your phone.
No, but if you can save your stuff, then, we've actually used it here at ECN, and it's actually helped us. So, because we also deal with flooding. Yeah.
All right. So the last question I'll get to, unless anybody wants to submit another one, is, getting into kind of beyond what we can do as individuals and kind of the larger system we are in an election year. What should voters be thinking about in terms of how to get involved with their lawmakers and what to know as they go to the voting booth when it comes to climate change, as we move into this 2024 season? Anybody want to touch that one?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much, but
no,
that's
go ahead.
a really good question. We need to make sure that climate's on the ballot and that justice on the ballot, especially if we want people to actually vote. And so part of that is how we organize. And so we have an Eastside Climate Action Coalition that meets the second Wednesday of every month. It's not just Eastside specific. Anyone can join. And so, reach out to me if you want that flyer and details. But really just organizing in your community. And I just really think that we shouldn't allow people to get elected that aren't talking about climate change. So, and that's part of how the demands that we put on the people we're electing. So get organized.
Got it. I know everybody else here works for government, but does anybody else want to jump into that one? Or
I'll just add that, actions at the local level matter. And there are essential steps that residents can take. If that's encouraging investment in green infrastructure, if that's shifting towards, as a city, your city's more renewable energy sources, educating yourself and others on climate adaptation, but also hold your local government accountable. Ask it if it has a sustainability plan. When new developments are being proposed, make sure that those developments are moving us closer to a green and environmentally sustainable future and not further away from it. And so I think political leaders can do this by incorporating public health principles into their framing and thinking. And I think residents can do that by holding those political leaders accountable.
All right. Well, I think those are all the questions we have, and we're getting towards the end of our time. So I just want to really thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the 118 of you who are joining us right now. I think this is the biggest webinar we've had since we've started holding these webinars. Obviously, speaks to the interest and the urgency of this topic. So thanks to each of you for participating. I want to remind everybody of the resources that are in the comments that we posted today, and we will also be following up with the recording of this as well as posting it on planetdetroit.org. Thank you to our partner, Great Lakes Now, a fellow environmental journalism organization that covers environmental issues all across the Great Lakes. And please, if you have not, sign up for our newsletter at planetdetroit.org. We would love to share the information and reporting that we distribute every week with you, as well as help you find out about upcoming events. So with that, I'll close us out and just hope everybody stays safe and cool out there. Thanks so much to all of our panelists and to everybody else.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.